Hello guys, I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft. Today I thought we'd start our conversation about the knives that I use, specifically the sheath knives that I use, and what exactly do I look for in a good quality sheath knife. We're out here in the backyard, the wind's blowing. I got the camera kind of tucked up there in a little corner trying to block some of that wind, so we'll see if we're able to shoot these videos and not have too much of a wind problem. But if we have a little bit, just bear with me. I'll try to speak up. So let's talk about exactly what do I look for in a good quality sheath knife. And I'm going to just use this old hickory butcher knife as an example here. Now this blade is of 1095 high carbon steel. That allows you to use a hard rock with the characteristics of flint to strike the back of this blade, and it will produce sparks because it peels off very small pieces of this steel, and you can ignite charred material with that. So that makes your knife even more multi-purpose. It's like carrying your flint and steel along with your knife because you can just pick up a good hard rock most anywhere. Another thing that I really like is a full tang construction. On any knife that I plan on having any abuse to that knife at all. And when I say abuse, I mean hard work. Most knives are not intended for some of the purposes that we use them for when we're practicing our bushcraft and survival skills. And I mean things like batoning and heavy chopping and prying. Morris Kohansky one time was asked what makes a good survival knife, and he said something to the effect, a piece of steel that's sharp that can be used as a good pry bar, and or that it works wood well and it can be used as a pry bar. And it's funny, that's what we wind up using a lot of our sheath knives for in some of the skills that we're out there practicing. That full tang really adds a lot of strength to that knife. And there's a couple of different pieces of terminology we need to talk about. Now, some knives have a rat tail tang, and I do not have an example of that laying here on the table. But all that means is that this right here, this knife, the width of the steel that's in the handle runs down, and if anything, it stays the same or gets wider as it goes into the blade of the knife. That's a full tang. A rat tail tang means that the blade width narrows as it goes into the handle. And you see that a lot of times on some very popular knives and some good knives like K-Bar or Buck. Their tang goes back and the handle is molded many times around that, or is pressed through a material. And sometimes you even see an end butt on the end of it. The other material, or the other way that you see some knives made, is the blade will taper in size just a little bit as it goes into the handle, like maybe it goes over where your finger groove is here. But the thickness of the blade pretty much remains the same as it goes back into the handle, but it does not go quite all the way to the end. And I prefer that over a rat tail because during some of those operations where we are using those knives where they're not really designed to be used, like where we're batoning, which means that we've got that knife sitting on top of a piece of wood that's a little bit thinner than the total width of our blade, and then we're taking another piece of wood and we're striking the end of that blade and forcing that blade through that wood. Now it is true that once the blade sinks in, if the blade is wide enough and you have a grind on the end that is shaped like a wedge, that a lot of the tension is released at that point. But depending on the characteristics of the wood and the hardness and the knots, that can be very hard on the knife. So the characteristics that I'm looking for in a good quality knife that I'm going to carry on my side, that is likely the knife that I'm going to have with me if an emergency occurs, is going to be very similar to if you go on Wilderness Outfitters, Dave Canterbury has a description of what he looks for, a checklist, if you will, under many of the knives on his website. And a couple of those items would be that it is of full tang construction, that it is a high carbon steel that will strike sparks. He has a criteria of 5 inches, though I think that varies a little bit on my side. Let's see, that it is non-coated. Coating prevents some of those striking options, and sometimes it's not very advantageous for scraping. He likes a 90-degree spine, which I do too. That sharpened 90-degree spine on many knives, they round over the back side of this knife. And what that does is it actually makes the knife more comfortable to use. As you put your thumb on the back of it and you're pushing or you're doing push cuts, that rounded surface is a little bit gentler on the skin. But what you lose for that trade-off is the ability to scrape. And I like to be able to save the cutting edge of my blade and to process materials and scrape barks and fat wood and such and create this fine dust in these very small pieces of highly combustible material that will take a strike from a ferro rod. And that's the other advantage of the back of that 90-degree spine. When you have a good 90-degree spine, you can pull a lot of molten metal off of a ferrocerium rod. And you can see that stuff just flying out. The test of a good sharp 90-degree spine on a ferro rod is that if material scrapes off from a standing position and when it hits the ground you still see it arcing and popping and snapping around, you're removing enough material from that rod that you're going to increase your capabilities of starting a fire tremendously. And that's something that we want. The backs of these spines on many knives can be sharpened, but if it already comes with a full sharpened edge, that's just another attribute. And something that he lists on his website and something that I think is important. So with that said, we'll dive into some of my knives that I have. We'll do a quick tabletop review. And I do want to tell you straight off the bat that all of the knives that you see laid out here are knives that I have used both hunting, fishing, outdoor wilderness skills, teaching survival classes, lots of hands-on practice. Anything that I don't feel comfortable, that I've had enough dirt time with yet, that I haven't carved with enough, that I see how it fits my hand and where those hot spots are, how it cuts and how it operates, I will not be reviewing that at this time. Only the stuff that I've had a significant amount of time with actually using it in my own hands will I be discussing in these videos. So let me get it all set up here and we'll lay some knives out one at a time and we'll start going through some of the specs and what I find to be some of the qualities that I like, and maybe to help you as you make your decision to go out and buy a knife for outside working, both woodcraft, bushcraft, and survival type skills. So stay with me as we continue this series. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft, home of global safety and survival. Until next time, God bless, guys.